Thanks, Shannon, and thanks everyone for joining us today on our podcast. As Shannon mentioned, my name is Michael Clark. I'm a past president of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries and a managing director at Agilis based out of Denver, Colorado. My guests on today's Leadership Development Interview Series podcast are the current presidents of the Society of Actuaries, John Robinson, and the Casualty Actuarial Society, Roosevelt Mosley. I am really excited to have these gentlemen on our podcast today. This is actually the first time in the history of the actuarial profession that either the SOA or the CAS has been led by someone that is Black. And more impressive that both organizations broke this barrier in the exact same year. And we were chatting just before we started recording today that this year actually happens to fall the year after that all 5 U.S. actuarial organizations were led by women for the first time, which is really cool. So John, Roosevelt, welcome to our Leadership Development Interview Series. I'd love to have each of you introduce yourselves for a few minutes so our listeners can get to know each of you better. John, would you start us off?
For sure. And Michael, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for having us, Roosevelt. Good to be with you as always. And I've been looking forward to this day with some excitement. So just in terms of a brief introduction, I'm obviously a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. I'm also a fellow of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries, and I'm a member of the American Academy of Actuaries. I live in Apple Valley, Minnesota, near St. Paul. My last job was as a life insurance regulator for the state of Minnesota, and I did that for about 6 years. And so that's how come I'm in Minnesota. In terms of past experience, I did 3 years, my very first 3 years were in pensions. And then I spent 23 years in life insurance, primarily on the financial reporting and reserving side. I was appointed actuary for 1 year with one of my companies. And then I did 6 years of OPEB, which is a very interesting combination of pensions and health. And, many of you in the CCA would know what that is. And actually, that's one of the reasons I joined the CCA, because I was doing OPEB work as a consultant. And then my last 5 years were as an insurance regulator. So technically, I'm retired since July the 30th of 2021. I do have a small company called Robinson Associates, and I have one pension plan as a client. It's a 30-life plan. I'm not looking to grow it in any particular way, but it so happened to come to pass. And so I do a little work for them a few hours once a year.
Well, and I'd say, John, retired probably in quotes, because I know your work with the Society of Actuaries has kept you more than busy over the last year so far in the various meetings and places that you've gone on their behalf. So very much thank you for what you do for the profession in your spare time, in your retired time. Yeah. Roosevelt, would you mind giving us a few minutes on yourself?
Sure, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and to be discussing the issue of leadership with you. And John, again, as always, my friend, it's always good to see you and to be talking with you. And to the point about John being retired, you are the hardest working retired man that I know. So when I get to retirement, hopefully my activity level does look like that. I am obviously a fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society. I am also a member of the American Academy of Actuaries and a certified specialist in predictive analytics. As far as my career, I spent the first 6 years of my career working for primary insurance companies, mostly in personal lines, a little bit of commercial lines, actuarial work as well. I then made the jump to consulting, and I've been doing that for almost 24 years now. A lot of my work in consulting has been focused in the area of analytics and helping companies use data and information more effectively in all of their business processes, pricing, underwriting, et cetera. And it's been a really interesting ride, a really interesting career that I've been fortunate to have taken part of, all because a long time ago I chose that I wanted to be an actuary. And so, again, happy to be with you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both. I want to start off with one of the things that I mentioned in the introduction here, that this is the first time that both the SOA and the CAS have been led by presidents that are Black. I want you both to talk to us for a bit about the significance that this holds for each of you personally. John, let me start with you.
Okay, sure. Well, one of the great things I think about the SOA is that the president is elected directly by the members. And in addition to that, we usually have 2 or 3 candidates. I can't think of anywhere where we just had one. And so, so the first thing is that, you know, I was sort of recruited. I had served on the SOA board before 2013 to 16. And they were looking around for candidates, and it is a responsibility of board members to try and find candidates. So I got the call from one, and I said, you know, I had tried running for president in the past and not been successful. And I said, I'm not so sure I want to do that. But then I got calls from other board members. And then I saw we have a nominating committee that chooses who are the folks that will get on the ballot. And there was a video put out by the chair, and they were talking about looking for diversity in a way that I had never really seen it before. Now, 2021 was, of course, a very special year because this was the year after George Floyd. This was the first full election after the year that George Floyd, that of course occurred, you know, a few miles from my home in Minnesota there. And so as I thought about it, I said, you know, if there's any year that might be a good year for a person like myself to be someone that the organization would accept as president, it was going to be 2021. And so I decided to raise my hand and make myself available, which that's the only way these things are going to happen, is if you're willing to do it. So in terms of it, meaning I know there's a historical significance, but whenever I say that, I give the credit to the members because the members elected me. And in my case, I was elected as one of three candidates. And so I always give them the credit. In terms of Black actuaries, you know, there's always concern about, you know, being represented. And so we've made some progress in the last few years, actually. By my count, with the SOA, there's just been 2 of us. Michael Wynn, Roosevelt, I don't know if you ever met him. He has since died, but he was the first Black board member of the SOA between 1986 and 1991. And I kind of regret that he wasn't active in IABA. And I kind of regret that I didn't take the trouble to go meet him where he was. So he was the first of 2 that we've had so far. The Academy, I think, has had 3 between Jeff and 2 other people. And CAS, I think, Roosevelt, correct me if I'm wrong, there have been 3 Black actors, including yourself, on the board. Maybe you can tell me if I've got that right. So in terms of Black actors, I think recently we've made a little progress, but I'm hoping to see more people raise their hands and say, you know, I'd like to try for these roles.
That's excellent. Roosevelt, how about you? What does this period of time hold for you in terms of significance?
Well, and if I'm being completely honest, I'm not sure that I've been able to grasp fully what this is going to mean. This is probably one of those situations where, you know, after we served our year as president and we get a chance to reflect back on it, the real true significance of what this has meant is going to hit me at some point. But I echo a lot of what John said. It does at least suggest that we are making progress. Some might call it slow progress, but we are making progress. And to John's point, back when I served on the board of directors, I actually was the first Black board member that the CAS had, and so that was another first that we had experienced. Since that time, there's been, and I made this point in my acceptance speech last November, is that at some point hopefully we get past the need to even have to count. There will have been enough folks that we lose count. And to your point, John, it's been more than 3, but I've actually lost count, which I take that as a step of progress in terms of members of the board of directors. But when much like John, maybe your story, the idea of being president had been floated to me by some others, and for a number of reasons, I never thought that it was the right time when it had been floated to me, and this was all prior to the events of 2020. When it finally became clear to me that it was time to do it, it was one of those moments where, and I think I've told this story before, it was actually my wife that came out of nowhere and convinced me that it was time to do it. It wasn't a point, it wasn't even something we had been discussing. She just, that was kind of divine intervention. I see it. But when I made that decision to do it, the idea of being able to provide a point of inspiration for those that are going to come after us, that really began to weigh on me and hit me, kind of the significance of this moment. And so while there will be a point where we do have the opportunity, I'm sure, to sit back and sort of think about what this meant for us personally, the weight of what it means for the profession and those coming after us as a whole probably weighs on me a little more than what it means for me personally.
No, that's excellent. I appreciate both of your insights on that. Roosevelt, let me continue along the same line with you. Over the course of your career, what changes have you seen that have affected actuaries from minority backgrounds?
So, and as when I saw this question, I began to sort of think back on my career and when I began sort of considering the actuarial profession, and this goes back a bit, but when I was in high school, actually my beginning of my senior year in high school is when I found out about the actuarial profession and decided that I was going to give it a shot. And the work sounded interesting. What actuaries do sounded interesting to me as someone who was interested in math and statistics. But one of the things that I distinctly remember, and I still have a picture of this picture in my head to this day, was when I got some information from the Society of Actuaries on being an actuary. One of the brochures that they had a picture of Mike Poe and Ollie Sherman in it. Oh. And for those of you that don't know, Ollie Sherman was the first Black FCAS. Mike Poe was in the probably top 4 or 5. I forget what number he's in, but I distinctly remember that because I saw 2 people that sort of reflected me, and it maybe solidified for me that, okay, this is something that I could potentially pursue. And so when I think about what has changed from then until now, obviously there are more minorities that have entered the profession. I remember going to actuarial meetings and many times being the only one. That's not really true anymore. And so that says we've made progress. I remember joining IABA back in the late 90s, I guess it was, when the numbers were small and the meetings were small. And I compare that to going to the last IABA meeting in New Orleans, where there were over 400 Black actuaries or people there, including a significant number of Black actuaries. And so all of those things that have changed, I think, do provide inspiration again for those that there is a community, that there is support, and you don't oftentimes have to feel like you are the only one. And so a number of those types of things that have changed have really, I've really been able to take heart that we are, again, making progress. We're moving in the right direction. The other thing I'll mention, and this maybe comes at it from the other side of things, is that since everything that's happened in 2020, while there has been an increased focus and an increased amount of attention paid to the efforts around DE&I, there's also been an increased amount of pushback in DE&I as well. And when that happens, it certainly does have an impact on minority actuaries. Well, because being brutally honest, sometimes it makes some feel like, is this really the place for me? Do I really belong here? Do I really fit here? And so while that isn't, that certainly does dishearten me some, it also reminds me that we've got to redouble our efforts, that we haven't finished the work, we haven't made it. We're making progress, and it's going to be important to continue to make that progress.
No, that's excellent. And yeah, I appreciate your perspective there. John, same, I'd love to get your opinion on this too. I don't want to call you the elder statesman here, but you are the retired one of the group. So I'd be really curious from your perspective, what changes you've seen that have affected actuaries from minority backgrounds over the years.
Sure. Well, I think when people ask me, I talk about my diversity career as starting in 1993 when I was at Nationwide. And it started, first of all, with the idea that the chief actuary, his name is Harvard Galloway, I don't mind calling him out, naming him. And he and all of his senior actuaries were white males, so I'll mention that as well. But he recognized the value of diversity. And at that time, it was only diversity, right? The E and the I didn't come yet. And he recognized the value of diversity. And he had a training for his 50 or so FSAs. And he brought in an African-American to do the training. And that African-American really challenged them with, and basically he was sort of making it clear to them what sort of benefits they had. We use a term which we didn't know back then. We didn't have it back then, white privilege. But that's really what he was sort of challenging with. And some of them actually got a little upset over that, but they did embrace the principle of DEI, even though they felt like, they were being picked on, for being white. They did accept. And this is one of the great things I've found over the years, that we have a sense of equity that tends to lend itself very easily to accepting diversity and DEI. As you mentioned, Roosevelt, I think in terms of, what changes, the existence and growth of the IABA, certainly in the case of Black actuaries, has been monumental. I mean, it's not uncommon. I go to an IABA meeting and I come across someone who says, John, if the IABA didn't exist, I would not have been a fellow, because the inspiration that they derive from looking at Roosevelt's and John Robinson's and Jeff Johnson's and Stafford Thompson's and Sharon Robinson and on, is invaluable to them. The other thing in general is, IABA goes back to 1992. And OLA, the Organization of Latino Actuaries, was founded in 2017. Now, I feel a little bit as a godfather of that, because I really encouraged a few of the founders to make it happen. But the other thing that has occurred since that time, and probably 2020, very recently, is that we've just seen several of these affinity groups just spring up spontaneously. They're not attached to either SOA or CAS. They're agnostic. I like that. I do think that's the way to go. And so we've had Abacus Actuaries, which is about actuaries of Chinese descent. Saga is LGBTQ members. SANA is a South Asian network of actuaries. And NAWA, the network of actuarial women and allies. So just seeing these just sort of just spring up on their own. All of our organizations, I imagine, are supportive of them. Mm-hmm. And that gives me a lot of pleasure, and I support all of them as much as I can.
No, you're right. And it has been good to see all these groups pop up, even if it's just to benefit those that are currently in the profession and give them a group or a home that of people that maybe face similar challenges that they do, or can help mentor and help younger actuaries navigate otherwise tricky circumstances that others might take for granted, for sure. And actually, let's talk about that a little bit, John. So you both have brought up DE&I. That's really come to the forefront and been in, I think, mainstream discussions throughout the country over the last 3 years. What advice do you have for people from minority backgrounds that are in the profession or that may be considering a career as an actuary?
Who you want to start?
John, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing is that the actual profession, for some reason, I don't know what it is, but people who end up in this profession have a very strong sense of equity and fairness. It goes back to the very beginnings of our profession, where one of the early calculations that they had to figure out is dividends, right? Most of our insurance companies were mutual companies, and so they had this question of dividends. What is the equitable way to do it? And they came up with what we now call the 3-factor formula. And in fact, there was a modification which was probably less known and not implemented as widely. Somebody said that's not equitable enough, and they came up with a 5-factor formula. So that's the sort of thing that sort of fairness thing that lends itself to a belief in equity and a belief, and eventually to a belief in DEI. So I feel like most actuaries support DEI in principle. There may be some, you've mentioned organizational pushback and so on and so forth. Somehow, my suspicion is that at heart, most people would support those principles. Employers, of course, believe that diversity is good for business, and that's starting from that premise, and that has been empirically shown in many cases, in many instances, in many industries to be the case. And all of the leading actuarial organizations embrace DEI. So all 5 of us in the United States and in most countries around, most organizations around the world, the larger ones, CIA for sure, IFOA for sure, ASA for sure, those I know of specifically. And so, and then finally, this profession, we think of it as egalitarian in the sense that anyone who can pass the exams can be a part of it. It doesn't matter what other characteristic you have. I remember I attended some meeting last year, and one of the presenters, who I believe is a fellow of the Institute of Actuaries, is on the autism spectrum. Now, you would never have thought, normally you think of someone who is autistic as lacking in certain mental capabilities. Well, clearly that person was not. And so forms of, even forms of disability really don't matter when it comes to, do you have the intellectual and capability and inclination to take and pass those exams. So I'd say, as long as you're willing and able to pass the exams, there is going to be a home for you somewhere in the actuarial profession.
Roosevelt, your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. And I agree with everything John said. And maybe I'll pick up from where he left off in terms of the sort of the agnostic nature of the exam process. Anyone that can pass the exams is certainly able to be a part of the profession. But as you become part of the profession, having passed the exams and having the title of actuary is one thing. Really feeling like you belong as an actuary might be something different. But what I would encourage, either those that are in the profession or those that are considering the profession is to one, a number of the groups that John mentioned earlier that are there to provide support to members that may not have been as represented in the past. Take advantage of those groups, because I believe they are really there's a movement here that I think is really going to benefit the profession as a whole as we go forward. But the other thing I would encourage folks to do as well is that as we go down this path of more diversity and ending up in a place where there's more representation, not only will others learn from us, but we will learn from others. And what I found is that as I've gone down this journey, as I've talked to people of all different backgrounds, as I've talked to folks internationally, this issue touches everybody, and it touches everyone in different and unique ways. And when you take the time to listen and hear someone else's story, you learn something about yourself, and I generally end up being better because of it. People that I would never expect to have had those kinds of connections with. And so I would also encourage is to be open to different people, different experiences, and being sharing in those kinds of discourses about diversity, about inclusion, about your background, because it never fails. I always learn something from someone when we talk about this.
No, I really appreciate that, because I think that goes all around, right? It doesn't matter if you're from a minority background or a majority background,
Exactly.
right? There's a lot that we gain from listening to each other's experiences and being able to find ways to apply those lessons learned to our own situation. That's for sure, even though we may be in completely different circumstances, right? And different backgrounds and all of that. So I think that's sound advice. I appreciate that.